Hi everyone, this is Allan McKay and welcome to episode 3. I'm talking with Carlos Anguiano. This is the second and final part of my chat to him. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Allan McKay podcast. Allan is an Emmy Award-winning visual effects artist and mentor to many leading industry experts. Listen in as Allan talks with other industry leaders in film, video games, and visual effects about their experience, lessons, and methodology. Allan will teach you pivotal advice to fast-track your career, better your skills, and reach your ultimate dream job. Check out the latest episodes on allanmckay.com.
Hi everyone, this is Allan McKay and welcome to part 2 of Carlos Anguiano's episode. The first episode was a lot more about his career and gave a lot of fun insight into a lot of the great studios he's worked at. This episode is a lot more hands-on. We delve further into his technical background and discuss a lot of the logistics and what it takes to be a technical director, as well as the major benefits of being a technical director. Being a TD or technical director, you can typically demand more money as well as be in higher demand. There are a lot of really powerful advantages from gaining at least some scripting ability. Whether you're a character TD or you're a character animator, some of the best animators I know have some scripting knowledge because it helps them build expressions as well as simple tools to help do their day-to-day tasks. Think of it this way, what if Maya or 3ds Max or whatever software package you use didn't come out of the box as is, but you could specifically customize it to be whatever you want it to be. Have a program not built for the masses, but built for you specifically. This sounds kooky, but if you think of it like Tom Cruise movie Minority Report and how he's, swiping screens away and doing a lot of really cool technical stuff and really intuitively, well, it's nothing like that, but by building all these tools that you allow yourself to literally do 10 or maybe 20 steps of any given task with a click of a button, or build a tool that functions as a majority of the work that you're doing so you can save massive amounts of time, either hours, days, or weeks. The best part about this is you don't need to know math to learn the stuff. We discussed this in the talk, but there are plenty of benefits from learning even just the basics. The biggest problem is learning where to start, and a lot of the material out there, unfortunately, is built for people who know math. So it sends most people down a rabbit hole of intimidation. So it's just a matter of really knowing where to look. Let's dive into this talk with Carlos and learn more about this. This is part 2 of the final part of Carlos Anguiano's episode. You can check out Carlos' website at www.losart3d.com or LOSART3D.com. He has a lot of great stuff that may be a little bit technical, but if you do want to get into scripting at some point when you're ready, his site is a massive resource and pretty much one of the only ones out there covering the content that he's covering. It's truly, truly advanced stuff from his countless knowledge at studios like Rhythm Hues, DD, ILM, Scanline, and so forth. So I do think this podcast is a great resource for those not even in the visual effects field, and I try to keep the material pretty much more about freelance and other subjects that are quite mainstream so they can benefit everyone. I will say this episode is definitely more hands-on, and this talk will definitely benefit you no matter what software you use, Max, Maya, Houdini, whatever. However, if you're not actually in visual effects, then listen anyway, but there may be a few things that go right over your head, so you've been warned. Okay, so that's it, guys. Let's begin.
Yeah, I think I've been doing this a little bit over 10 years now. I don't know if it's 11 or 12, but it's definitely been a little bit over 10 years. So, probably the bigger studios that I worked at that most people would probably recognize is Rhythm and Hues, Disney, Digital Domain, and Industrial Light and Magic are probably the bigger ones. And some of the sort of good studios that people might have not heard of are probably like Pixamondo, Blur Studios, Digital Dimension back in the day with you, and
Scanline.
Yeah, Scanline. Yeah, that's right, Scanline. Yeah, definitely. And and I think probably a few other that I don't know if I really care to mention, but
LLP and Super.
Yeah, I'll still, I'll admit I worked at Super, but I will never admit that I worked at Larry Levinson's Productions.
I never knew who they were because, when I think 2004, when I first met you, that was an interesting time because there were some studios around, but there weren't enough Mac studios that, like, if you heard of one that you hadn't heard of, you would kind of be like, oh, who are they? And
yeah, I mean, there was basically two, right? Like, there was Blur and there was Blizzard. And, like, if there was something else, you were just like...
Back then, there were, like, Tiger Air and DD and all those, but it wasn't like... There weren't so many now that, like, screw it, like, there's too many to mention. But back then, like, you guys, it was you and a couple other people went to LLP, and I was just like, I've never heard of them. I kept looking them up, and they were the only studio I'd ever come across who never had a website.
Yeah, well, but to be honest, I think the reason why they didn't have a website is because LLP was actually part like of a much bigger company that was like a full production company that was actually just doing made-for-TV movies, which I think the only client was actually like the Hallmark Channel. So like, who watches like the Hallmark Channel? So really. Yeah, like the whole Larry and I guess Larry Levinson is really funny because actually if you watch like Mad TV episodes, there's actually a Larry Levinson character who I guess is like this very famous like Hollywood producer that's also like a total like fucking douchebag.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
But yeah, so anyway, so like he had like his own company that just made for TV movies, and the particular area where I was working at that time, I mean that I never worked at a time, was literally just like this small VFX department that they were opening just to see if they could save money over having to outsource. Basically, like maybe there was gonna be some
they'll save
savings.
that 20% or whatever.
Yeah, by like basically keeping it in house, you know. Yeah. But I mean, I don't know that the company was necessarily all that bad, but like that visual effects department was basically, I mean, it was basically only around like I think maybe half a year, you know. I mean, it was just like a total failure.
I've seen a lot of people do that, and they think, okay, well, if we do it ourselves, then we're, you know, the markup that those studios are charging, we don't have to worry about. The thing they don't keep in mind is the fact that then what you're doing instead is you've got to consistently employ people even when you don't need them, rather than pay for people when you need. It's kind of like if you have a full-time assistant versus hiring someone when you need someone, like, you know, having them on a retainer.
Yeah, you know, I think it's tricky because I think the problem's a little bit more detailed than that, because, I mean, you definitely see people sort of hiring, like, freelance, you know. I mean, I think that the longer you and I have been around, the more we see, like, the idea of staff jobs have, like, they're just completely disappeared. I mean, we all pretty much work on, like, freelance basis. So, I mean, I think that's definitely, I mean, I think that plays a part with it, but I think, to me, I think the biggest problem with those startup companies, and it still happens in some companies today, is that a lot of the times the idea comes from somebody that like doesn't understand the process of making visual effects. So,
or they make shoes for a living, but then like, I want to own a film company, so they
but like let's say that maybe they're great like producers, and maybe they're great at creating, you know, like casting and finding writers, but all of a sudden they're like, we want a visual effects department, so what do we need? We need computers, we need software, and we need to hire people, right? So a lot of the times the people that get put in these places, you know, they don't understand the product, they don't understand like how long it takes to make something, and so a lot of the times I think it's just really poorly managed because of that, because I mean it's basically business people that don't understand like how the product is made, like coming up with like a price for how much they're willing to pay.
That's right.
And also like dictating how it's supposed to be made, you know, and like a lot of the times, you know, those places just didn't have the type of leadership that you need to really be able to not just trust of your employees to inform you of what are the realities of the situation, and they just never really had that type of leadership, you know, because they just saw it as like, it's really easy, we have boxes, we get a couple of licenses, we see people in front of them,
now go make us avatar.
Now we have crowds and hair, and like, isn't there a plugin that does like perfect fire, and you just like, you know, press the wing button, and like
I want Lord of the Rings right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's like really brutal because, I mean, you know, people just don't understand that, like, it's just not just the software, you know, it's people that, like, you know, have very specific skill sets that they've specialized on, and even the best guys that are super fast, you know, it's just, they've just been doing it forever.
You can't just sit down, hire a bunch of people, and sit them down and expect to make a movie. You need a pipeline, which is kind of like what we're going to get into a little bit later on anyway. So
Yeah. And the big thing is that you can't just, like, also create a pipeline by committee. You're not just going to hire 20 dudes and then, like, everybody's going to sit around and say, like, what they think the pipeline's going to be. Because then, you know, and I mean, a lot of people do operate that way. And I mean, we go to all these studios that have like just like really horrible pipelines, or the stuff that they call pipeline. You get there and you're like, I don't know why you call this pipeline. Like, this is not pipeline. You know?
That's right. Excel is not a pipeline.
Yeah. You know, or like, no, absolutely.
So we'll get into as we go along, we'll get into a lot of stuff. As you mentioned, you've worked for Rhythm and Hues, you've worked for Digital Domain, you've worked for Disney, Blur, ILM, a lot of different studios, and you've done a lot of really cool stuff. What you do typically is your pipeline TD, and you came from, and we'll get into your whole history, but you came from doing more character TD stuff as well as being a character soup for Scanline. Sure. What I find really interesting is knowing you all these years. I remember when you first started out after you went to AI.
Yeah, right. That's correct. Yeah, the Institute of Los Angeles. Yeah. I don't even know if it still goes by the same name, but it's still like an art institute.
There's two. There's one across the street from you, and there's another one. Which one?
Yeah, the one across the street from you has got to be the one right next to the Santa Monica Airport. If it's still there, it's like the one here in Ocean Park.
It's literally right there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I spent a lot of time in this area going to school.
Okay, and so then you went to Super 8, small boutique place.
Yeah.
And went on after that to Digital Dimension, which at the time they were pretty quickly moving up the ladder.
Yeah, but we were a small team. I mean, we had to be like maybe 7, 8 3D guys. I mean, at least when I got there. I think we had quite a bit of compositors, like a lot of the fusion guys.
I think in Alternate, I know, we had, because it was Blade 3 we're doing, so it was fair. It was more than that, but like it was still
I don't think it was
tight.
Much more than that, though. I mean, we all. I mean, if you think about that room,
it was a really core team of people.
Yeah, it was a pretty small room, you know.
There's like 4 at the front, 3 on the side, 4, and there wouldn't have been more than 12.
So I mean, we're under 15 people.
And then strong comp team as well. Yeah. And what I've always found funny though was knowing you back then, you had really solid scripting skills.
Yeah.
You had good modeling skills. You wanted to be a character TD, and
I wanted to be a modeler.
No, well, I thought it was you wanted to be a character TD, but you wanted to keep your modeling skills up to fall back on.
Right.
Or maybe it was no.
I just wanted to do art, man.
I think you're right. You want to be a modeler, but you knew you would make your angle.
I just want to make art, man.
Through character TD stuff. But as long as I knew you were always like, fuck scripting. I don't want to do that shit.
Yeah, no, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, it's like not for me, and. I always thought it was funny because you were really fucking good at it, and you're solid in everything else too. But I just think it's hilarious because it's definitely what you do these days.
It's funny that you actually mentioned that story because that's definitely been like a really defining moment in my career. And like now I meet these young guys that are very talented, and it's funny enough because now it's mostly effects guys. You know, back then really. Like what I wanted to do was I wanted to model because I came from like drawing comic books, and like to me that was the fun creative part. So when I learned 3D, what I wanted to do is like, oh smack, like, you know, like now I can make this stuff in 3D way cooler than I could ever draw it. So that's really how I got into like hair and rigging and modeling. Like to me, like hair rigging, cloth effects, all of that was a means to an end. Like what I wanted to do is like I wanted to be the person that designed like that really cool character. But it's funny that you bring that story up because I now I don't meet that many modelers that are in the same situation, but I run into a lot of effects guys, you know, a lot of effects guys that are, you know, they want to work on shots, you know, they want to do those really great like explosions and fragmenting and blowing up buildings, but at the same time, they're good programmers and good scripters because just the education side of it is just evolved to such a degree that, like, I mean, you have kids, and I mean, you know, people like you are partly to thank for that, but I mean, now you have these kids that are coming out and like, they're like way ahead of like the game, you know what I mean? Like they lack a lot of experience, but as far as like understanding, you know, fluid simulation and scripting and matrix math and rigging, they're already come out like miles ahead of where at least I was when I got out of school. So it's funny because I run into the same thing, and I have like these effects guys that are like, yeah, man, you know, I wrote this awesome like camera tool, I wrote this awesome modifier, but you know, don't tell anybody because I want to do my effects. And so I always go back to this story at Digital Dimension, where the guy that was like the main senior TD, James Coulter, you know, they offered me like a full-time job at Digital Dimension, with the idea is that I was basically going to be like an assistant technical director to James Coulter.
I remember all that.
You know, and so they were like, well, you know, we can't keep you here full-time, just kind of doing whatever you want to do, but like if you want to basically be this guy's assistant, we definitely know you can do that, and like we'll hire you full time.
I think you were pretty against it.
Well, no, I mean, I remember being like, oh man, like it's a great honor, you know, but at the same time, I don't want to be pigeonholed, and I feel basically the same thing that these effects guys tell me now, you know, where they say, where I was, you know, like I don't, you know, I just said I want to model and I want to be an artist, and I feel that if I go this road, you know, 5 years from now, like I'm just gonna be stuck programming, and I turned down the job, man. you know, like I turned down the job and I said no, and you know, like 12 years later, like I'm trying to start my own development company, you know, and I'm programming full time, and like it's funny because in a way it's like you can't escape your destiny, you know. It's like you fight it and like you say, you know, this is what I want to do, but the truth is that like sometimes you know, you have certain talents and they might not necessarily line up with what you love to do, but there's still things you enjoy to a certain degree, even if that's not what you foresee yourself doing
but
in the future, you know?
I think it is about that too. You want to be passionate about what you do. Otherwise, like I always say that, like, if you don't find that at your job, then you're going to end up spending all your spare time trying to get that fulfilled.
Well, I mean, I can tell you that any artist, regardless of what you do, that gets into scripting is somebody who enjoys the challenge of solving a problem. Yeah. Even if they're not asked to do it. You know what I mean? They want to be that person that are like, no, this is crap. Like, I can fix this. I can make it better. And they're going to like figure out a way through like either coding or through something to basically like defeat that problem. And like the reward's not even if anybody knows about it. Like the reward's literally when you like type that last line of code and you run it and then you're like, yeah, that shit works. That's right. Like I beat you. I did it. You know? And like it has nothing to do with like whether somebody gives, because that's the thing, you know, when being a TD is probably like the most unrewarded job, because nobody ever thanks you when shit works great. When shit works great, everybody assumes like it's shipped with an app or
it's
somebody
like
else wrote it.
If everything's working great, no one complains.
Nobody complains. When shit breaks, you're the asshole. Like bottom line, you're the asshole. So really, the rewards are very personal rewards. So even if you love doing effects, right, and you love modeling or doing whatever you do, like, if a part of you has that, you're eventually going to end up scripting and fixing these problems. And because it's a matter of your own reward and your own ego, you'll never be able to outrun it. You know what I mean? Like at some point it's going to catch up to you because you'll see the problem and you'll be like, I don't want to do it, but I know I can fix it. Fuck it. Let me just do it. And it's too late, you know, like you can't fight it.
One of the biggest, actually I'll quickly say like my moment of like when you're like got the sword down, you're like, yeah, I fucking did this shit, I beat it. then you like, everything's working, it's great, my code's all working. And for me, at least in MAXScript, because defining local and global variables isn't as big a key thing. Like, I'll close Max, I'll reopen it, and then I'm like, it was working a minute ago. My variables.
But that just comes with experience.
Then you got to go back in and be like, okay, where did I not define, and what's going to be global?
Yeah, but you know, the thing is like, you know, I mean, you're a really good scripter, obviously, but you know, your whole specialty is not around that. That's just one of the many tool sets that you do, you know. So, you know, it's kind of interesting because, and you know, we also face another challenge. And I was thinking about this because, you know, both of us, you know, do scripting and programming to a certain degree, but we're pretty much self-taught, you know. I mean, we weren't like computer science majors, you know. So
I fucking quit school grade 9.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I didn't, but I definitely didn't. I didn't go to programming school, you know.
Yeah.
But because of that, you know, a lot of the times it's messed up because I think we struggle with things that are like so obvious to other programmers because they just have like all this other history that like, you know, they went to school for it, so they have like all this other filler knowledge that maybe if I was like, we were to run into it now, I would say like, well, that doesn't really matter because we don't, it's no longer relevant.
You want to cut the fat and learn what's
But it was
necessary.
a build up to that in a way just made you like understand the process in a much richer way.
I just want to learn Hello World and then start building my tools.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that, I mean, I think it really wasn't until my job at Pixamondo, because Pixamondo, which was literally the last 2 years, was the first time that I was working at a company 100% as a developer. And I can tell you that, and also starting the Mango project, which we'll talk about a little bit later, it's also opened my mind up to so much more like kind of like academic ways of approaching it, you know. Right. But at the same time, sometimes it has been a struggle not having that lead up to that, you know. So it's funny that you say that, but I think at the end of the day, something that can like really be overcome with like just experience, and as long as you have the time to get into it, and you finally say, you know what, like I'm tired of dealing with this bullshit with local and global variables and like, you know, the scope getting lost and that type of stuff. And then you just sit there, you figure it out, and after that, you know, like you just come up with a system, you know?
You learn the correct syntax, well, not syntax, the correct method of like, okay, I'm going to do things this way, and this
methodology is a lot to do with it. I mean, I can tell you, like, if you open my MAXScripts, like they all start the same way, you know, they're all structured the same way, and there's a reason why I do that, you know, and when I work at other places where I have TDs work under me, a lot of the times they end up picking up my structure after I talk to them because they realize like, oh shit, you know, like this just covers so many of the things that I usually like get wrong and struggle to debug, you know,
That's
and
right.
it already sort of structures the whatever I'm writing in a way that, you know, already forces me to like clean up as I go. Like it's already a clean way of working.
Yeah,
you know?
and it's a whole learning process. Like one thing, like I was gonna get in this later, but I mean it's a good time to get into it. Is do you think being an artist you could benefit from scripting? Which is a rhetorical question.
Oh
but-
no, man! I mean, absolutely. You know, I think anybody can. I mean, the thing from scripting is that scripting is much simpler than programming. You know.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I had when I was going to school, and everybody would tell me this, my teachers would tell me this, that in order to script, I had to be good at math. You know, and like so they always painted it to me like I had to be like this like scientist to be able to like, you know, write scripts. But the truth is that like scripting is like a very small part of programming, but it's so useful because it's just like actions. You know what I mean? It's just things that like if you have something that you're just doing all the time, you know, and like it's just a pain in the butt. Like for example, maybe adding like a noise modifier to like 150 objects, but if you just add it, it uses the bounding box of all of them, right? So then your noise is not the right size. Maybe you want that noise to always be the same size. That's an action, right? That's like grab 20 objects. For every object, make a unique noise modifier. Apply a setting of like, you know, box size 10 and size 10, length 10, width 10. And then just repeat it 20 times, you know? Like when you see it as a set of actions, there's no math there, you know? Like I'm not doing the square root of anything, you know? I'm like literally just packaging things that I'm doing over and over again that if I did manually, it just sucks, you know what I mean? That's the stuff that keeps you away from doing the stuff that's fun, which is the art, right?
Exactly.
So you pick up scripting, and all of a sudden it just opens up your world to when the software is done, you can be smart. You know what I mean? And you can add all those missing links that are just like functionality, you know, and it just allows you to focus on what you want to do, which is create like fucking awesome work, you know?
Actually, like, the very first exercise in technical director transformation course that I've been running was that we literally go and we model, like sculpt a rock, and then we write down all the steps we did, as in, okay, we made this, we did all this. Then it's like, okay, well, let's rebuild the entire thing as a script based on this. But then let's go and build a GUI around it, expose all the parameters and randomize it.
Absolutely.
Then it's like, okay, great, well, and it's a very simple exercise, but now hitting a button, you get a different rock every single time.
Yeah, exactly. Because the only thing you changed in there is that you added the word random and a couple of numbers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's brilliant. Yeah,
so,
I mean, it's brilliant.
You know, but you build on that. It's not, for the most part, I mean, most people's way of learning initially is to use the listener. And I actually, when I first started in Maya, I was doing that a lot. And then, you know, for Maya, there was actually more about, okay, I copy and paste this, and I delete all these flags, and I figure out...
Right, yeah.
But the main thing was that, you know, as you go along, eventually you're going to get into functions, and you get more into...
Yeah, and I think a lot of people try to get into MAXScript through the listener as well. And but I think that...
it's a good starting point, but you got to quickly kind of get away from that and go and... I think the best way is to start to learn to be friendly with the manual, which, again, most people think is... You know, manuals are for newbies, but it's not like.
And you know, that's another common misconception because a lot of people.
You're in there 24/7. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, but that's a huge misconception that I have people all the time that don't come from scripting. That it's almost like they feel like if you're a MAXScripter and you look at the menu, like maybe you're cheating, right? Because you're somehow not good enough to just remember the like 5 billion commands that are available to you and all the options. And and you're absolutely right. Like I mean, I don't think there's a single day that doesn't pass by that I'm programming that I'm not looking something up. And I mean, you're right. If I'm in MAXScript, a lot of the times, you know, it's like, oh shit, how do I do the file parser again? Like, how do I pull the extension off a file? You know, like little silly things like that.
Yeah, you can't remember it all. It's good to have it all there. And
the same goes with any language. You know, I mean,
and looking at other people's code as well, because you might look at something and be like, oh shit, they're doing completely different to how I do it. I never would have thought of that. You know.
Well, I mean, I can tell you that, you know, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that because actually the way that I really started getting into scripting was that before I got into scripting, I was already doing rigging. And funny enough, in school, my first sort of exposure to programming was that I took a MEL script class, and I actually ended up dropping the class. I don't know if I ever told you this story, but I took a MEL class, and like I dropped it because this guy was talking about like, well, these are functions, and these are loops, and these are variables. And like, it was like an 11 course. Yeah, and he's like, all right, cool. So for your end project, just write a tool. And I'm like, what? Like, it's literally, I mean, I don't know how many of you listeners are going to remember the Karate Kid movie, but I mean, that's that moment where like, the Karate Kid gets pissed off because it's like, I'm washing cars and wax on, wax off, and like, this is not karate. Like, I don't know what the hell this is. And it's not really till like the end of the movie that he learns how to apply all these other concepts to like win the epic karate tournament, So, but except that my karate tournament never came. I was just like, dude, I'm gonna flunk this class. Like, I'm gonna lose like my scholarships. I'm gonna lose like I gotta drop this now. And so it's kind of funny because it wasn't until like literally, maybe 4 months later, 5 months later that I was getting more into scripting, and I started seeing rigs by Michael Comet. He had written this really cool like auto rig thing, and I wasn't quite looking at the auto rigger yet. But when you like ran that rig, it was like a custom rig that like had like all these squash and stretch and like, and I mean to me that was like mind blowing because I was just doing like parenting and IK chains, and I mean I was very rudimentary in the learning of rigging, and just like you said, I was like, well, how does he do this? Well, let me find these expressions, let me find these scripts. I open them up, and then all of a sudden it's the same concepts, but now in like a applied way that I was interested in figuring out. So now I'm seeing conditionals, now I'm seeing loops. And it's funny because that eventually led to like, okay, well now I want to have GUIs for my characters. Well, how do I do a GUI? Oh, I do it like this. And before you know it, a lot of the times you naturally tend to challenge yourself. And when there's already people that have done it before you and have shared their code, that's a great place to start learning. Like I learned vector math from Michael Comet's auto rigger, because I was just like, how is he drawing a bone chain out of like 3 locators? You know what I mean? Like, how is he figuring out the orientation? There's no orientation here. There's literally just 3 points in space.
Right.
And that was it. And, I was mediocre at math at best, but it was those things that like once I had the proper context and once it was related to something that was interested to me,
right.
You're right. I used all of those examples to like cannibalize it. And down to this day, sometimes, if I'm too lazy to figure something out on my own, I'll go to ScriptSpot, man. I'll go to ScriptSpot. I'll find something that's similar. If I can get to the source code, great. And then I just, I might use it, I might not use it. It might inspire me to do something different. I might physically use snippets from it. And of course, always give credit to the people that you're taking this code from. But that's one of the great things about that community, that especially MAXScript, I think, more than any other application, just has so many examples of so much stuff that's written that there's just, as long as you're willing to go through code and apply your mind to see how people broke down specific problems, then you can learn some awesome stuff, And it's funny because now sometimes I open some of the scripts and the first thing I think is like, this guy sucks. Like, this is one giant rollout. And I don't know if your listeners are going to understand this rant, but it's just like, it follows no standards. There's no separation between like GUI and functions and structs. It's literally one giant rollout with everything built into a big button. But then like somewhere in between that code, there's 3 lines of code that you're just like, that part is fucking brilliant.
That's right.
And it just saved me a shitload of time. So like, it's definitely one of those things where like, even when you think that like the code is crap, like literally, like you never know what you're gonna learn. You never know what you're gonna be discovering.
You give credit and you say thanks to so and so. By the way, you suck at making GUIs, but thank you so much for.
No, I'm not mentioning names, dude. I'm not mentioning names.
When you mention Michael Comet, that's really funny because when back in '97, he was working at Volition, and this was like Max 2.
Sure.
And I just remember he wrote like an article, and it was kind of like defining roles like animators and this and this, and he
Right.
mentioned back then he mentioned it, like what a TD was, like a technical director
Right.
was, and he said a technical director is someone that is kind of best of both worlds. They're creative, like an artist, but they're also a programmer, and they're kind of the way he had worded it was it's kind of like the step up above the artist. It's kind of like, again, that's not.
There's
really,
not a hierarchical. It's not a power trip. It's more about like it's like
exactly.
the evolution of the artist. That's
where I kind of disagree, and that's what I'm not trying to define it right now. I'm just more defining what he was explaining. But I just remember at the time being like, 14, 15, something like that, and like looking at that and thinking, okay, so like that very small goal, but that was like my ultimate goal was like, okay, if one day when I'm like 50, if I can make it to LA and like work as a technical director, then I'll have made it.
Yeah, like that was your dream.
And, and it was Michael Comet who wrote the thing and kind of like said.
Because the one that you understood now, you had a name for the thing that inspired you.
And it said, at least like then he kind of defined like my goal, which.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that's also a theme that was very popular in the early, not in the late 90s, early 2000s. It was the whole concept of super TVs, right? Mm-hmm. And that was actually like a term that was coined by somebody that was being used. Like the idea that like, I don't want to just hire guys that I don't want to hire guys that do effects. I want to hire these artists that are...
would they call it an STD?
An STD, yeah, there you go.
Sorry.
There you go. Super TV, STD. Ah.
Damn. It's like how you have LUTs, and then you have these super LUTs, yeah.
And then you have sluts.
I'm sorry, in daily sometimes I gotta be immature and giggle.
Yeah, well, but it's interesting that you say that because that was definitely kind of like a buzzword around that time. And I think it was really popular around smaller studios versus something like Disney, where like they really had a separation between like we hire programmers to do like all the hardcore stuff, but we want like our artists to be artists, right? Like if I hire a modeler, I want him to be like this traditional sculpting person, and we'll teach him these tools to become like know enough to be able to do his art.
Especially back then, you talk to Disney, they'd say send us your traditional work. It
exactly.
They wouldn't give a shit about your computer work.
Yeah, they wanted to see a portfolio. They wanted to see a book.
Stuff. Yeah.
And it was so goddamn expensive because you literally had to go and print a book, and maybe you got your book back, maybe you don't get your book back.
I would send originals just because I couldn't be fucked going across town. So I sent my originals and...
So you're like, I hope I get the job, because if not, I just lost 6 months worth of fucking work.
Well, it's funny because one of my buddies, he worked for Warner Brothers. He's from Chicago, but he's in Sydney, and I actually sent him all of my originals, and they were all sketches and whatnot. And the thing is that, like, I didn't get the job was more because they just kind of downsized, but then a few years later, he's like, we became really, really tight friends, and then he's like, holy shit, I know you, like, you applied for a job in my company, and I just remember saying to him, like, can I get my prints back?
I could use those. Like, those have been gone for like 5 years now. Yeah, but that was something that kind of started changing around that time too. That like now you had like these smaller studios that were really trying to break into VFX. And they
don't want the ramp up time. They want
and they were getting away from Linux. They were getting away from like Power Animator. They were like all these technology that's almost dead. Unix is still around, but as far as startup goes, it's like just Windows right now is probably just the easiest way to get started. And those were a lot of the probably the things that were changing around that time. It's like now there was a focus of like the smaller team saying like, well, if I have 2 super TDs, it's almost better than having a team of 20 lighters because they can automate a lot of what those lighters are going to do, and they can set a look, and they can do all of the artist work, but then they can also like write tools and automate it to generate the same bulk of work. And since these guys are not just programmers, but they're also lighters, they really do understand the needs of production. They really are thinking in a practical, contextual way.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing, actually, now you bring it up, that I've kind of been pitching a lot, is just kind of like, if you are someone who is an artist but has scripting ability, then that does put you in a pretty unique role, because it means that you're definitely a lot more... I think it does increase your employability chances, because you do have a strength to be able to kind of build walls over...
Yeah, and I would agree 100%. And it's really interesting because at the companies that I've worked at recently, I'm really the only person that does what I do. And sometimes I serve, 75 people, 100 people, sometimes, especially at a place like Pixelmondo, there was a time where I wasn't just serving the Santa Monica office, but I was leading the TVs at all of the global offices. And, it's funny because I also see a lot of young guys that were coming into Pixel that were maybe modelers and lighters. And, they were just like, oh man, like you're so good. You seem to always be employed. They never let you go. You don't struggle with work as much as we do. Like, what's your secret? And it was hard for me to tell them, but it, in a way, was luck. And it was the fact that my luck is that I just happen to fall in a good niche. And it's exactly what you're talking about, which is that niche of, I know enough about modeling, I know enough about lighting, I know enough about rigging, I know enough about cloth, I know enough about hair, I know enough about like everything, but I can program the shit out of everything, and I can make every artist be able to do things that they didn't even know how to do before, because I'm simplifying the process for them. And I do think that whether companies realize it or not, they have a need for that. And every company always has like at least that one guy that like when he quits, people are like, how? And don't get me wrong, everybody's replaceable, and every company.
But there is someone who builds an extension to the company.
But there is that feeling of like, this guy does so much that like we're gonna be screwed without him. Like, who's gonna pick up after him? And usually that's people who script, and even if they're not scripting full time, that's usually people that were involved in the everyday process of content creation, which is not what I refer to as CGI and creating visual effects. But people that were also involved, whether they realized it or not, or willingly, or whether they were asked to it or not, in training and developing tools to streamline things.
Absolutely.
While they were doing their own tasks that had nothing to do with anything else.
You're right. Like there's so many studios, especially in my early days, where I'd go to, and there would be that one guy, and like you kind of want to model yourself after that person because you could tell that he was the highest paid, he was the highest needed, and it wasn't about money, but it was more about like that person is respected.
Like you want people to look at you the way they look at him.
Yeah, like that guy like is someone that they all like. Even if they don't know what the hell he does, they're still like, that guy is just like amazing. And you kind of know that like if that person was to leave, you're right, there would be a massive hole where that person was, just because like he kind of filled the void, he kind of gave an extension where there are certain things you didn't know how to do, he could build, and I think it does like, it does put you in a very, like, if you're a company and if they need to downsize, that person would be the last person to get let go.
Here's one of the last people are going to leave. And I can tell you that I personally experienced that in these last layoffs that we had about a year ago over at Pixelmondo, that we had 300 people in LA. And I mean, while I was there, I saw we closed branches, we closed places, satellite offices. And when it came to downsizing in LA, I was probably one of the last 5 persons to let go out of 300 people that were there, And, but as I said, people ask me about this, and, I wish I could tell them like, oh, well, I'm so amazing. But the truth is that like, it is luck. For me, it was luck because I never planned it out. Like, I never had like this strategy of like, oh, I'm going to learn this because then I'm going to be indispensable. Yeah. But in a way, because I gravitated towards scripting and I was also really close to production, it really did build a niche that's, I think, incredibly underserved.
Yeah.
And while I didn't do it consciously, I was lucky enough to somehow just end up in that role at times,
It may be luck, but it's also, for anyone who more is strategic about choosing their positions, if you were to say, okay, well, I'm living in the Bay Area, do I become a character animator or do I become a TD? And it's like, how many fucking character animators between ILM, Tippett, and Pixar are there going to be?
And the day that you want to raise, or the way that like, the day that like you just want to just have a little bit more responsibility, the day you basically want to question your role at the company, like there's like 100 people waiting to replace you.
Yeah.
It's definitely. That's the things that you can't, like, if you really want to have longevity in this industry, you have to have something else other than the main skill you do. And I mean, other than somehow being an artist and being attached to very special clients, so that like you have like this word, which actually was something that was very popular with flame guys back in the day, that you weren't just hiring the operator, but you were bringing the operator in because this guy had connections and work.
Yeah.
Scripting's really the only other thing, you know what I mean? Like bringing some sort of like worth, but like maybe even after you've automated, there's still keep up that needs to happen, you know? So I mean, it's tricky, but yeah, I mean, you kind of have to do something else. And unfortunately for us, we're so detached from the client that it's almost really impossible to say. So like if it's between I become a programmer or I become like an artist that also has like awesome client connections, like that one is like a really far-fetched. You might as well learn programming even if you hate it, because that's something that you have control on. And the truth is that like anybody can learn programming, you know what I mean?
That's a big common misconception. Again, with TDT is trying to beat is the fact that here's the three biggest misconceptions or obstacles that people face, and this is something I tested very thoroughly before I announced the course, was do you need to know math to script? Which no. If later on, and again, like I didn't know scripting, I didn't even know math. Like second week of grade 9, I quit school. I wasn't even at school the past 5 years. I barely went. And for me, like I actually learned a script because I was in Maya, and after a while I started being like, okay, I want to get better at particles. Got into that. And I'm like, I want to get
similar
better at
to me.
scripting.
It was like the expression side of getting like cool effects done.
Exactly. And then after a while, you want to go
programming.
further. You want to build onto that.
Yeah.
And you don't need to know math to be able to do this stuff.
Right.
And again, like you start out small, and bit by bit, you're going to get more curious. And initially, you might be copy and pasting shit from the listener.
Not even understand it.
Yeah. After a while, though, you might be like, okay, well, let me change one value.
Yeah.
Then you're like, okay, to get that. Well, how do I randomize that? How do I put in a loop so that way I can repeat it? How do I?
I think having purpose is really the best way of learning programming.
You're absolutely right. I'm sorry to cut you off, but like that's one of the big things. If you want to learn a script, and one of my friends at Weta, he told me this actually when I first, like I'd been scripting, but I wasn't really doing more than bare bones shit. And he told me, okay, well, to learn, you got to write a tool with actually something in mind.
And something that you are interested on, something that you are actually like, I would use that. So I want to know like how to do it.
He wanted me to write like a Maya tool just to be able to go through the scene and tell which lights have cast shadows on, which don't. And I'm like, I don't want to know that. I want to know how to do particles. But eventually I'm like, okay, I'll play your game. But the fact is that like, if you have a purpose, rather than sitting down, what's a string? What's a function?
Because it's such a big subject.
Yeah, you need to make
you need
sense
an entry point. I mean, that's really what purpose is. It's an entry point where, like, instead of having to look at all these insane options that just look like a bunch of text to you, you have a very specific entry point. I'm trying to do this, and this requires 3 steps. I know this is the first step, the second step, the fourth step. So how do I do the first step? And you're going to learn that part, and just like you say, you're growing from then on out, and before you know it, your project's done. And then, you move on to the next. And I think it's interesting because I think that that's also part of the reward as an early programmer. It's just like, once you have that entry point, like once you chip in and you find yourself with a purpose, it's like a crack in your windshield, like it starts small, but it just like it just spreads, and before you know it, your whole windshield's fucking spiderweb,
Yeah. And the second big misconception was that people figure that they don't, they won't benefit from, they don't need to know that shit, which obviously we've already covered, but it was just like, I don't need to know that shit. And it's like, well, believe me, you do. If you want to have more stability in your job, if you want to earn more money, if you want to grow upon
if you want to work less overtime and have like a nice life and just go home after 8 hours, learn to be efficient, and you're gonna automate your workflow.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, it's like it's good for you. I mean, it's like all around good for your health.
I do protein shakes and I script. And the other one was that a lot of people say like, usually if I need a script, I need it right away. I need to be able to do something today, so I don't have time for it. In other words, what they're thinking is that if I need to write a script, it's going to be a few days of work. And the times when I've needed to do stuff typically is because I'm like, fuck, I got to get this done by 5 p.m. It's noon right now. That's when I actually will break out scripting and I'll start to build mini little tools. And it doesn't mean you're doing Mango or you're doing something crazy.
Yeah, you're not building an entire pipeline. You're literally just automating something.
Yeah, you build bits and pieces and modify another script to do something, and suddenly I'm shaving off days of work in a few hours.
That's just it. And I think what people don't understand is that you're right. They take that route of like, well, if it's going to take me 3 days to write this script, right? If you're going to take me 3 days to write the script, well, maybe I can do it in 2.5 days if I do it by hand. But what they don't realize is that once you've put those 3 days into it, now you can do it again in a second.
Yep.
And now that's part of your toolkit. That's something that you now have. I mean, I remember being in productions that were like that, where people would be like, oh shit, like, what do you mean you're writing these tools to do this? Like, you know, you're not going to be done before like 2 days before we deliver. And like, you would write all of this code, and literally 2 days before you deliver it, you would run it, and everything would be done like in a matter of seconds. And then you would literally be like, and you know, the best part is that like, now we can just do this. This is a niche. Like, now we don't have to spend all this time rewriting it. And like, now every time we need to do this particular thing, it's done in seconds. Like, it's not done in 3 days. So the big picture of it is that like, you're just better and faster, and you have something else you can do without even thinking about it.
Transformers 3 is like a great example where I had to do, like, our client was DED, and like, I had to do these characters being evaporated. There's 16 elements that went into one character being killed. There was 8 characters or something, maybe it was 16 characters on screen.
Sure.
And DD, you know, liked the look of what I developed, which took weeks to get to that point. Then they said, we need to see it on all the characters before we approve it. In other words, they won't give me feedback until... And the thing is, I basically had...
Which is horrible. It's a horrible thing to deal with, but that's just the way people are.
I had 2 days to then go and do it to all the other characters.
Yeah.
I can tell you right away that it would have taken about a week to do it, and that is like brute force, is head down, reconfiguring everything, redoing it all, because there's like really complex rigs and a lot of crazy shit going on.
Yeah,
everything's simulated. I remember being at midnight. Everyone got home that day because we're really stressed and really sleep deprived. I decided, okay, I got 2 decisions. I basically need this done by morning to then sim. So I can either brute force this whole thing, or I can try and script. And at the time, like, I wasn't confident that what I need to do, because it was...
So it's in a little big scope.
It was very specific to every single character.
Yeah.
And like, I ended up building like classes, like permutations and classes of like a rig, a character, information that would plug into it, and then all the different effects. And all the different effects the rig would apply to that character, it would snap it all in the right place, all the information would feed in, and it would vary it for every single thing. And I ended up like thinking, okay, I'm going to make my decision now, brute force it or do it as a tool. I decided to do it as a tool, not knowing or being confident that I could do it, but I remember getting to 4 a.m. and being like, okay, I think I got it. I'm going to hit the button and let's just see if this fucking works. And I hit a button, and it starts generating all my max files, and I can see the directory filling up. 256 elements which need to be simmed.
And I mean, guys, you were going like, oh shit, shit,
exactly what you were saying a few minutes ago.
You my bitch, you my bitch.
It was one of those points actually where your heart does start like, you know, racing, but at the same time you're like, maybe it's just generating max files.
Yeah, maybe it's just empty. So maybe I'm gonna open all this shit, and it's all
so then you start
empty.
opening one at a time. It's like, no, it actually looks like it's gonna work. But the coolest thing was like, okay, I got it done, and I felt so fucking good. And then the next day I came in and I realized I just built this tool which is literally doing about a week's worth of work at a click of a button. And then I'm faced with the big dilemma of, do I tell everyone and show off, or do I just like hit a button and go to the beach? But yeah, you're right. It frees up your time so that way you've got...
because the thing is that you knew that request was going to come down the line again. You knew that a new animation was going to come in, or a new asset was going to come in.
No matter what, this was going to be the process for the rest of the show.
And that was the way to do it. And I mean, it's funny because, I mean, that was something that I think was, I mean, it might have been instilled in you before, but that was something that, like, back in the days of Digital Dimension, that was something that, like, that was kind of like the idea, you know, like, you know, when we did all of those original, like, blade ashing effects, right? It wasn't like, well, yeah, we could have done all that shit by hand. But why? Like, it's the same thing over and over and over again, and we have to do it 300 times. So why not develop the look and generate a pipeline that then allows us to, like, more automatically push the look? Yep. And, you know, sometimes I think people are intimidated because they say, like, well, if I automate the process, what if it replaces me? but they don't really understand that the purpose of automating things and doing things faster is about getting more iterations for the client out.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And working less hours. So, you'll never be replaced because, I don't know what your experience has been with production, but when you figure out how to do something out in a week, and then in a day that used to take a week, then for the next week, they're going to give you 5 weeks worth of work to do, in each day. You know what I mean? So,
I'll paint a perfect picture. For me, I started working from home, and it's because I didn't like typically working for studios, where I love to work for studios, but I didn't like hitting a button, doing the job, waiting for feedback again.
Yeah.
I've built a pretty solid pipeline, and this was actually a good testament where I went away to Australia for a few weeks and worked from my Mac laptop remoting into a machine.
Sure.
Just because I built tools enough to automate everything.
Yeah,
it meant that I could take on, rather than one feature, I could do 4 or 5 at a time.
Absolutely.
Because you've got everything submitting to the farm, you keep alternating, you've got a good tracking pipeline, or at least something that you understand. It might be,
sure.
But it means suddenly you can get more done. And
upping your productivity is just a great investment because you're right. Like, either you're gonna get the project done with less people and in less time, which is going to generate you more money because you get more money at the end, or you're gonna be able to turn around work a lot faster, which the client is gonna love and is gonna come back and continue to do business with you, or just like you said, you'll be able to take on more projects at the same time with the same amount of people that you have.
That's right. Right.
And so in the end, that's what all these studios out here are trying to figure out. They're trying to figure out with the prices of stuff being driven as slow as it is, how do we stay afloat? And the only way we can stay afloat is by figuring out how to work smarter, how to automate things, like create niches, create things that we can do effortlessly and easily and sell that product so to have some sort of income,
Absolutely. And you're right, like from an artist perspective, you get to go home early at night because you're working faster. From a studio's perspective, you get to do things cheaper.
It's a win-win, man.
Especially places like Encore and other studios who are doing TV, where turnarounds, it's got to be done quicker, less time.
How much time is wasted? Like there's a new animation, another lighter's opening the file, and it's like, oh shit, okay, I got 24 passes, I'm gonna delete half shit in my scene, and I'm gonna merge some other stuff. Oh shit, but when I merged it, the material is wrong now.
Even tracking where a version came from, you know what I mean?
But the thing is that a lot of these things are done sometimes by hand at some of these studios.
As much as I love Blur, it's still in that way.
It's still the way we were working literally 10 years ago.
I mentioned that to someone recently about even I've built tools that are kind of more automating all the stuff, and it's like, well, with Blur we don't version, and it's just like.
Right.
And again, I'm not talking about.
It's like we have a point cache folder that you write to, and you have a point cache folder that you read from. Done, bitches.
So again, not saying it in a negative way, but as in there definitely is a lot of you can either spend the time and build something big, or you can brute force it. And Blur, because they've got such talented people, they can brute force. But at other studios, it's not.
But you're right. But Blur is a perfect example of if we refer to them as the super TDs, or the technical director that's both an artist. That's the perfect place to shine, because don't get me wrong. We know that Blur definitely has a programming department, but the programming department is something that's kind of come over several years that they've been in business out of necessity. But they're picking up legacy stuff that was built by TVs. You know what I mean? There wasn't always a programming department. There wasn't always somebody that was this is the head of pipeline at Blur. It was actually all these people that were doing the work, that were coming up with these workflows, and were writing these scripts, and were automating everything. But these guys weren't programmers. These guys were not hardcore computer science guys. These guys were doing effects and lighting and modeling and rigging, and they just needed a way to be able to push these giant cinematics through the pipeline.
Yeah, Dave Humphreys and all the guys there, actually, even Paul Hormus and you and everyone else. Everyone was writing tools, and it's just
even Daniel. Daniel's a really
Daniel's
perfect
a freak,
example.
though.
Yeah, Daniel Daniel's a freak, but I mean, you gotta think, like, the thing that was awesome about, yeah, I mean, he's a freak because he's like a savant. Like,
Yeah,
I guess,
yeah,
like,
no, that's what I'm saying.
yeah,
Is it I compose some music
Yeah,
on
I
the
compose some
weekend.
music, I do effects, I just painted this, I made a painting in oil and canvas. What do you guys think? Oh, by the way, I just programmed some awesome tools. And you know, a lot of your listeners might not know this, but I mean, the thing that was like awesome about being Blur at that time and actually seeing Daniel like one day come up to my desk and be like, hey, can you just show me how to do like basic MAXScript? And the next day, basically having like the most advanced automated impact tool that anybody had ever seen, that was basically the beginning of Rayfire, you know what I mean, dude? And like people just know Rayfire, and Rayfire has changed a lot and has introduced a lot of other stuff. But the very first Rayfire was basically a copy of what Daniel had done.
I gave a talk about this the other day, actually, about like more in a way of like being able to monetize in a second career. So if you want to do scripting, you could sell tools.
Yeah, sure.
And I gave Rayfire as a perfect example. And actually, I did. I gave the big history lesson about Daniel Ferreira wrote this
awesome particle automated impact system.
Yeah, and the whole idea, it's straightforward, but it was really super cool.
Yeah.
Thing is, he never released it, but what he did do is put together a cool demo
YouTube
video.
Yeah, he put the YouTube out,
and that video inspired the original Rayfire. And so then Mir Vadim wrote Rayfire. And the thing is,
and to be fair to him, it's evolved dramatically.
No, it's great. Like, it's not like, oh, I'm going to steal that idea.
And he called Daniel, and it's funny because we know about it because, like, I remember Daniel telling me, hey, this guy that's building Rayfire, like, contacted me and asked me if he was okay that he was making this script. And I said, like, yeah, it's awesome. Go for it, you know? So, I mean, it was definitely, like, this really cool thing to see, but it's an example of somebody who, like, didn't have to script, right?
Exactly.
Didn't have to script, but all of a sudden, like, decided to like just learn it and
that's it, and
do this awesome project with it.
Mir wasn't a programmer as well. He could script, but he wasn't like a hardcore programmer. And he still isn't to that degree. But like, and that's what I loved is like Mir came along with this idea that he got inspired by a video. He went and made something that now has become his business, and he lives very comfortably off of this, you know, this whole business. So and it all came from that. And again, it's not like Rayfire even is that anymore. It still has that feature, but what happened is along the way, it's like, okay, well, I want to add fragmenting, and the fragmenting at the time was per boolean, so it's just like random slices projected,
and this is a perfect example of like the entry point, right? So the entry point for Rayfire was this like automated impact system that basically just it like shot rays to detect where like a bullet was gonna strike, and it literally made like a fucking super spray or something, and put like some, you know, little chunks, and then it added some and then it added some modifiers to like whatever it was striking to be able to like carve out a hole in it, right? But that was an entry point, right? So you get that entry point, you build that functionality, and then as soon as you finish that, you're like, oh shit, you know what would be cool? Yeah,
that's
like this other fucking thing happened. And, you know, it can happen with any tool where you build something that's very... I struggle with that with pipeline tools all the time.
I bet.
Because I start and I set up a workflow and I'm like, this is really great, but the truth is that at some point I got to stop myself and move on to something else. Or I will work on that for the next billion years because you can always improve on things. And it's a very addictive feeling.
That's right.
To get to that mode, you know?
But it's also cool with you, and again, we'll roll into that in a moment, but with Mango, it's like when you suddenly get clients coming to you saying, we want this, because you're going to suddenly say, cool, I never thought of that, I'm going to implement that. That's something that everyone long-term will benefit from. And that's what TP, in a way, like when Thinking Particles first came out, TP1, it was a nice idea,
This horrible implementation. It was nobody knew how to plug anything into what. It was not obvious.
It was meant to be like a Houdini-esque program, and it wasn't. But TP2, because they had the backing of us doing Blade, it gave them insight into a production environment.
But let me ask you something. I mean, and it's similar to the Daniel sort of Rayfire situation. Like, how much do you think that P-Flow might have been influenced by early TP1? Because it's similar idea, right? It's this more procedural way of creating particles, but this one was just so rough that it was almost unusable.
What it was is you had Particle Studio, and Particle Studio was these linear events.
Sure.
So it would execute one, and then you would tell it to go to the next event based on particle age or one or two other things.
Right, I vaguely remember that.
And that originated, and again, this is actually going with what we were just talking about, where you get an idea and you build on that idea, because originally that came from Sandblaster, which Sandblaster was this plugin in Max 1.
I kind of remember it, you know, I mean, and then, we're talking like circa 97, 98, I mean...
Actually, it was 97.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking...
But the thing is that, like, they all evolved.
Over 20 years ago.
Jesus. So there are iPass routines, which is what plugins were called in 3ds DOS, that did similar to that. But Sandblaster became Particle Studio. Particle Studio, Oleg Bayborden was working on Particle Studio Plus, I think it's called. And along the way, Autodesk or Discrete at the time contacted him, said, can we hire you to implement? And what it was is Particle Studio Plus, or Particle Studio Advanced, so some name like that, was then just going to become... Max 5's.
But let me, right. And I mean, I remember kind of that happening. And I mean, the saddest part was actually that after PFlow was integrated, like everything else Autodesk, it was like, okay, we're done, thank you. And it was like, well, but there's this bug, but there's this thing. It's like, no, we're done. It's working. We're selling it now. It's done. Yep. Move on to the next thing.
Well, Brandon Davis was saying that actually, that like, because he was pretty involved in Particle Flow. In the implementation, because like he was kicking butt with all the particle stuff, and he.
No, I mean back then, I mean he was like, man, like it was like they were like rock stars, you know what I mean, dude? So it's kind of interesting, like where they were at that time, you know.
I've known Brandon since I was 14 or 14, and I got all those guys. We all hung out on FNet chat, and I don't think anyone realized at the time, but I was like a little kid, and then like the thing was, Brandon and I we because he mentioned this, and it's funny because I do agree, like. We both get emails all the time from people back then, and they would be like, you must know Allan really well, and vice versa. Like, you must know Brandon really well. Like, they kind of imagine that because we're like the two effects people in the industry, that we must be like best friends and hang out all the time. And it's just like, no, we'd never met. And then finally, like, I came out when I was 21, and so caught up. And like the guy's super cool. He's like, in a way, like, it was really cool to see him and Toby and a few of the other guys like doing all this cool shit that they were doing, just because like there were some really just guys at the time pushing Max and doing some really cool stuff.
Yeah, well, there were the guys that I mean, at least for me, like those are the guys that were. And I mean, even you to some degree. I mean, when PFlow came out, it was like Brandon and you. That like it was like, and I mean, I even remember like being at Digital Dimension and being like, hey, wait, you're Allan who? And like 2-3 days into it, like the light bulb went off, and I'm like, oh yeah, I watched all your videos, you know?
You fucker, you didn't reply to my email.
No, I wasn't like, it's kind of funny. I've always been very proud, so I always look at others' works to learn from it, but at the same time, I've always been that guy that struggles to ask for help, you know what I mean, dude? So, but that's a problem. That's not a good quality. That's, like I could save so much time sometimes by, relying on people I trust for help.
I'm the same way. At least I used to be. I think I'm a bit more like I'll be the first person to say I don't know shit if I need to get help. But I mean, all these things came from that idea, and TP, like I think PFlow was already going its own direction, but you're right. I'm sure they probably fed off of each other a little bit.
They have to. I mean, how do you develop like PlayStation 3 without looking at Xbox to at least see
if
like
you're smart,
what
the first thing you're gonna do is look at the competition, look at what works, what doesn't work, and I learned this recently. Is like if you're working on a product or something, it's good to actually go on and read the reviews on like Amazon or something.
Yeah, sure, because you might get an idea of what the user base thinks and what they're lacking.
Or you can read the reviews, because typically people go and write reviews when they're pissed off about something.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is horrible, by the way. It's horrible.
I was talking with Christina about this actually, and we were looking for like a AT&T or a Verizon, and I Yelped it, and like there was one place that got like 2.3 stars, and I said, that's really good, because nobody is ever going to go on and rate AT&T, like the local AT&T store down the street.
Stars,
Well, no, they're not going to go on and rate it like that was a good experience. They're only going to go on if they if they're like, fuck you, I'm going to like ruin your business. So no one's going to go on and be like, they were really nice to me, 5 stars. Like they're only.
It's rare. It's very rare.
Yeah, the main thing is that they're going to go on when they're saying negative to say, and that's usually the only reason they'll return to it. So therefore. And same thing with McDonald's or anything else. Nobody rates those kind of things because it's more they're everywhere and they should be there. It's not like going to...
and there's a certain amount of proficiency that's just expected out of them.
Exactly. So if you go to Per Se or some like really nice restaurant, you're going to go and write about your amazing experience because it's
sure. Because it's your first time there, and you were like, you just.
But you're not going to do that about some place that you expect to be around you. So
some place you take for granted. Some place you take for granted. Some place that to begin with is kind of a pain in the ass that you have to go there.
Yeah.
Like nobody's really happy to go to McDonald's, right? Like nobody's really happy to go to the AT&T store.
So typically with product reviews, you're going to get people who are actually going to say, you know what, like this sucks, and I wish that this was in here. I was expecting this.
Sure.
So you can actually go on and be like, great, those are things that people are demanding and expect when they first open a package.
Well, I think probably a better example of that might have actually been like box 2 and 3 for PFLA. I mean, I think that you look at those, and I think they were definitely chasing a lot of the usability that was already pre-established by TP. Like TP. And I mean, TP blew minds when they decided to add like a physical simulation built into the particle system. I mean, that was like,
Krakatoa and TP are the most powerful pieces of software I've used.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
When they work.
Yeah, well,
Krakatoa's probably better. I don't have that much experience. TP sometimes is like...
Yeah, I've been teaching in my destruction course, like, by the way, TP's going to crash, just FYI.
Yeah. And sometimes TP, you might forget just how to plug it in, but once you figure out how to plug it in, it should work. Yeah.
That's right. Or you don't know why it's working, but it's working, so just...
Yeah, so just trust.
But with box 1 and box 2 for particle flow, that wasn't TP, because that was me. That was me working with Oleg, because we wanted to improve on... where that
box 1, right,
and box
right.
2, but box 2 didn't come out till after
but
box 3.
Box 2 was a lot of box 2 was a lot of those physics tools.
Yeah, it was a lot of, it basically started getting developed. It was mainly meant to be fragmentation, which never actually happened, which is a weird thing.
That's interesting.
And that's because, and that's what I was bringing with Brandon, was basically they decided they could only have one more feature in particle flow, either scripting or fragmenting, so they decided to go for fragmenting. And that's when he was like, no, we're scripting, and like really, had a...
And that was great. I think, that definitely took the next level. The fragmenting was something that, people could somewhat do by pre-fragmenting, And I think even in TP now, for like really, really, I don't know how you're teaching your destruction course, but it's been my experience that like a lot of the times, like to really get those great fragments, that's actually pre-fragmented as well, you know? Like you're not doing those fancy like on event fragmentation.
Yeah, all the volume breaking stuff is great, but because I've done a lot of talks about doing procedural versus pre-frag for the initial fracture, and I always think that pre-fracturing is the way to go because you're going to get all the hand cut stuff. With the box stuff, that was more because I came from Maya. I dished Max for a while.
Right.
I didn't really say it publicly, but I didn't use Max anymore. And then when PFlow came out, I started to move back. And to this day, I'm still shocked that like Maya doesn't have like good particle system.
like thing.
Yeah, any particle system.
But you know what? That's another kind of great point, because when for me, like I started as a Max guy. Like I love Max. I mean, I grew up in Max, and to this day, it's definitely the 3D software that like I know the best. Like I might not be the best artist, but I can make an entire short with Max. It might be a shitty short, but technically workflow, everything, like, I mean, I know that software upside down. There's just something like Maya where I specialized. I learned the things that I needed to do to be able to get those jobs at ILM and at Digital Domain and that type of stuff, which was rigging, was rigging and deformation. And that was basically it. I mean, I didn't really, most of the cloth and hair stuff that I was doing wasn't proprietary, but that's, something else. But catch me up a little bit. I kind of lost the place where I was at. We were talking about...
What I was just saying basically is that I was using... I switched to Maya for a while, and that was because I wasn't... Yeah, well, basically when I ended up using box set is because of... I want all the features from Maya put into Max.
All right, we're talking about no particle system being along. So the reason why I gave you this whole history about like how much I love Max is because then it comes the bad news, right? Which has been like one of the things that we've seen happen a lot is that Max almost disappeared in the visual effects community, and Max on its own couldn't really hold its weight. It was really the introduction of these plugins, V-Ray. I mean, V-Ray changed the game. I mean, V-Ray brought Max into places like Digital Domain. You know what I mean? Places that were like, if they were working on Windows, it was all Lightwave, and if they were working on features, it was all Unix, all Maya, all RenderMan, at some point Mental Ray. But I mean, it changed the game. It actually got people looking into Max, something that people have been saying like, oh, it's just games, it's just this, and said, holy shit, like there might be a place for this in the feature film pipeline.
Yep.
You know, and V-Ray really broke ground with that. And then, to me, the movie 2012, the work that was done through Uncharted Territory for the Sony movie, then it then opened the door to holy shit, fume, thinking particles, massive destruction scenes. The pipeline is Max. Like there was definitely a defining point there. There was other people using thinking particles. There was other people using fume, but it was literally the work that was done on that
2012
movie
made TP.
that people outside of the Max industry were like, how the fuck did they do that? And the answer was Max, thinking particles, fume, and the relationship between the two. And it's funny because when I saw that, I always said, holy shit, you know, like right now we're at a place where Maya, which is what most people in the film industry still prefer, mostly because it works outside of Windows and it has a great referencing system, which are really the two things that separate it from Max, like bottom line. It has V-Ray now. It has Krakatoa. It has Fume. But the missing link is TP, or a particle system that can be used to create those sort of procedural setups in a least shitty way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's interesting because, I mean, like if Sivas at some point was to say, we're not going to spend time on final render anymore, we're actually going to develop thinking particles for Maya, like people would have, every guy that's out there that says I hate Maya would have to learn Maya because that's where the industry would go. And not necessarily because Maya is superior, but those things are out of our control. I mean, that's a reality. People in these bigger companies want to work in that software.
Yep.
And that's like one of the small things that it's still keeping Max in business, you know. It's kind of crazy to think that it's not even Max itself. It's like literally this third-party plugin that like it just has, and that is not even like, it's sometimes you just want to like smash your head against it, but when it works, it's so fucking powerful that people are willing to bring this new application, this strange operating system, and do this work completely outside of their pipeline, just to be able to tap into the overall power of it, you know?
Growing up in Australia, every studio was Maya. There weren't really any Mac studios. Yet, like one of the biggest studios I worked for, 99% of the work that was on their reel was me sitting in the corner in a Mac seat. Like, they would be in Maya 5, I would be in Max 3, because they wouldn't upgrade to Max 4 or 5. So, you know, it was mainly just because they wanted me to use Afterburn. Yeah. And so until that was when I actually did move to Maya.
Which Afterburn was kind of like that too, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it was one of those things where like...
The only thing else out there really was Voxel Bitch or Storm from DD.
But that wasn't even a commercial product.
No, it wasn't. But that's the thing, is there was nothing else really to compete. Yeah. The only thing commercially that could compete was Digital Nature Tools for Maya, and it was fucking terrible. Like, it can do thin smoke. It couldn't do like self-shadowing thick smoke. If you had a team of TDs and RenderMan, you could do some good Raymarcher stuff.
Which is what everybody else did, right? Like everybody else was not using, and that's the sad part about like the whole Max Maya debate, is that like Max has some really phenomenal tools, like the modifier stack.
I still love
like
the modifiers.
I mean, there's so much stuff in there that's like brilliant, but there's other stuff that is so dated that is just slows it in a big in a big studio production, referencing and like having to have all these giant assets in your scene being one of them, you know.
Absolutely. Actually, I remember like because Kresmir, who wrote Fume Effects and Afterburn, I was telling him for years, if you made Afterburn for Maya, you would be making millions. And he simply didn't want to do it just because he didn't have a Maya SDK. He said, I've got a Max SDK, so I'll write for that. And at the time, like, there was nobody for a good...
Even to this day, I mean, to be honest, like, I mean, I know guys that develop Maya plugins, and now with the Python implementation, you can do like Maya API and develop full Python plugins. But there's not like a lot of resources. There's not a lot of those entry points for that. You know, I mean, it's tough, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I was just going to say earlier was like when we're talking about Rayfire and taking one idea and growing on it. I mean, what
Sure.
really made TP was initially, actually, you kind of said it already, but like Blade 3, because they had us. Like it was the first insight to actually be able to modify their software for a feature film.
Yeah, because we were using the nightly builds. And
well, we weren't meant to, but somebody kept like going behind the scenes and upgrading.
Yeah, we won't mention names. We won't mention names.
But yeah, we were. We're the back and forth it allowed us. To
And I mean, we kind of requested the idea because I remember one of the things that I was trying to do while I was there is that since we didn't have the shape collision and it wasn't anywhere on the radar, we were doing like particle to object exports and then trying to run them through Reactor at the time.
Oh god, that's right. Yeah.
So I mean, I remember actually writing like a script to be able to kind of do those two steps separately. But then you have like tons of these fragments that needed to get masked and be put like in rigid body collections, and like in each frame they might or they might not fragment. So like you literally have to like simulate one frame of Reactor, stop, change a bunch of shit around, and then continue. And but it was interesting because I think it was because of us trying to take that effect to the next level that at some point it was like, hey, how about you guys do it?
And that actually, like, having rigid bodies was what made it what it is. I mean, it's the biggest feature. And from there, again, 2012 was the next big step.
I would say that both fragmenting, I mean, as cheesy as the original phase fragmenting was, it still was an awesome feature. And then you added, like you said, you added that rigid body, and it was like, even Houdini couldn't do that. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Houdini is interesting because it's only been the last couple of years it's finally been on my radar. Because I've super plenty of shows. I have used Houdini, not as extensively as Maya and Max, but it's been one of those things where I always felt like you could do anything, but you needed to write it yourself. However, in the last 5 or 6 years, ever since Houdini 8, it's stepped up to a point where out of the box, it can do everything.
Yeah. But I think that was just like you said, like that was the biggest complaint, right? The biggest complaint was just like, I took a Houdini class also in college,
really?
which I ended up dropping because you're right, like, they're like, this is subs and this is pops and you connect this and you connect that. And at the end of the lesson, I had a fucking super spray. Yeah. And I was just like, it just took me an hour to make a super spray. I have a super spray in Max already made for me. Like, I hate this software.
That's right. But then suddenly now you got Pyrofix, you got the Flip Solver, you got all this really
and you have like
stuff.
presets and you have like grids already made and you have setups that are already halfway plugged in, right? Similar to like those scripts and ScriptSpot where like it's kind of a template that's already made for you. So if you want to go in there and learn all the really hardcore shit and make your own stuff, you have a great place to start. But at the same time, you have something that's already going to work for something generic.
That's
you
right.
know? Which was the biggest problem before. You're absolutely right. Like, I mean, Houdini was just like, and it was weird because, it wasn't really later until I was sort of exposed to more baby versions of procedural workflow like PFlow and then TP, but then I was just like, oh, okay, that's where you build your own super spray from scratch. So that like,
so you're gonna add one more feature that isn't.
So you can add that one more feature that's not in the box that I can't add right now.
That's right.
But like as a student being dropped, like as somebody that like wasn't doing scripting at the time, wasn't doing programming, was literally like doing modeling and rigging. And very rudimentary rigging, sitting me in front of like Houdini was like a bad idea.
I honestly could ask you 1,000 more questions. I'm tempted, but it's nearly 1 a.m. No, this is awesome. Like, I honestly want to do another session just because, there's 12 more questions even.
Yeah, well, this has been a lot of fun for me, man. So like, just anytime you want to do it, just let me know.
Well, this has been awesome, man. Well, thanks again.
Yeah, no problem, man. My pleasure.
Okay, so that was it, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. There's definitely a lot of really great material in there. And if you want to check out Carlos's website, again, it's www.losart3d.com or losart3d.com to learn more about Carlos's awesome work. And lastly, if you do want to dive into scripting and you're not really sure where to start, I've got a free crash course up on scripting on one of my websites. If you want to visit www.tdtransformation.com, which stands for Technical Director Transformation.com. You can enroll there. It's free. This covers a lot of really cool stuff, and my sole purpose of this course was to get people to be able to instantly pick up scripting, and by the end of the first lesson, you'll be writing tools that you can use right away in production, and I guarantee you will. Just as a disclaimer, signing up for the crash course, you will be on one of my lists, so I will be launching a high-end 4-month-long technical director course, which is 16 modules, so you will receive a couple emails about that later on if you're on there. And if you don't want to receive those emails, then simply sign up, do the course, and ignore those emails, or just unsubscribe once you've watched all the videos, whatever you want. But if you want to stay on there, then I'm just giving you a heads up. There will be just a couple of emails about the course later on when I do rerun it again for the second time ever after its big success a couple of months back. But anyway, the main purpose of me mentioning this is just because the crash course, I think, in my opinion, is the best material out there for at least getting a few instant wins with scripting, getting more confidence with knowing where to start. And beyond that, if you want to get more into scripting, you can check out websites like www.scriptspot.com for more MAXScript stuff. And I will post more stuff on Maya and Houdini, so like MEL and Python specifically, later on as well, if you guys are interested in that. Also, if you find these more technical podcasts useful, let me know, and I'll look into getting a few more really cool podcasts down the line. I've already lined up a few really cool interviews with guys from Autodesk and Chaos Group who develop V-Ray, as well as side effects for Houdini, as well as a lot of other great developers. So if you're interested about that and you're happy for me to kind of nerd out with these guys, then let me know, and I'll be glad to continue doing these. Again, if you guys are more interested in the career stuff and you're like, you know what, I don't want to know about this, I want to know about how to make more money and get more jobs, then let me know and I'll keep it more on point. But thanks again, and next episode I'll be interviewing John Brannick from Weta and Digital Domain on his work on Apes 2 and Hobbit 2, as well as dealing with a lot of stuff like Burnout and a whole lot of other cool things. So also I'll have more solo material coming up soon too. That's it for now. Thanks again, guys, for listening, and I'll see you next episode.